You believe all these Bible stories about miracles. I mean, come on, really? Parting of the Red Sea, Jesus walking on water, resurrection. Richard Dawkins, he's my favorite go-to guy as far as atheists go. Yeah. Anytime you type in atheist comments or something, somewhere in there will be a Dawkins quote. So here's what he had to say. The virgin birth, the resurrection, the raising of Lazarus, even the Old Testament miracles, all are freely used for religious propaganda. And they are very effective with an audience of unsophisticates and children. So guess where we are? Right around here. That's us. So we all outgrow those things. That's what Dawkins is saying. It's good for little kids. You had little flannel graph stories. So you go, ooh, isn't that neat? You know, Daniel in the lion's den. That's for kids. Come on, grow up. C.S. Lewis said something as kind of a challenge to this whole idea of miracles. He said all the essentials of Hinduism, as an example, would remain unimpaired if you got rid of the miracles. You still have Hinduism. It'd be pretty much the same. But you can't do that with Christianity. It's precisely the story of a great miracle, a naturalistic, meaning no miracles at all, no God, just this world. So naturalistic Christianity leaves out all that's specifically Christian. So does that make sense? So you can take all these world religions and even Islam. It's not a big deal to toss out some of their ideas as far as miracles go. You still have Islam. You still have these rules you got to follow. You'd have to listen to Muhammad and you have to recite the prayer and all that kind of stuff. It wouldn't change anything. But Christianity, you pull the resurrection out. And what do you have? Just a social group that comes here on Sundays and sings songs because it feels good. But the guts of it are gone, right? It's absolutely torn out. I love Eric Metaxas. Anybody see his show sometimes on YouTube? You can find his stuff, and he's got a radio show. Okay, he wrote a book on Bonhoeffer, but he wrote a book on miracles. And he defined a miracle this way. I thought this was a pretty good definition. A miracle is when something outside space and time, right? So we got this natural world here. Then you got the supernatural world. So he says that supernatural world, it says outside the material natural world, enters space and time, whether just to wink at us, or to poke at us briefly, or to come in and dwell among us for 3 decades. Do you catch that last reference there? Talking about Jesus? Yeah. So it's something from outside the natural realm that comes in somehow and interacts with this natural world, some way. So let's do this. Let's talk a little bit about some, I'm going to split this into 2 parts here as far as miracles go. So the first part we're going to talk about making a case for miracles, at least the possibility. And then the other half is, what about the yeah buts, the people that say, well, you can't have a miracle because, and this and that. So we'll take that on as well. So the case for miracles, it seems like this is a pretty safe place to start, doesn't it? Because most people are going to say they do believe in some kind of supernatural being. Well, once they've done that, do you see the doors open? You're ready, because God lives in a supernatural world anyway, then you're ready to have another existence, another sphere besides this world, and it's possible those two could interact, and that would be what we would call a miracle. So I won't spend time on this, but we've talked about this, a couple weeks back. The beginning of the universe argues for a God, the Big Bang. You don't have a Big Bang without a Big Banger to get this whole thing off and running. We talked about the beginning of life. Life is so much more complicated than they used to think. Design. DNA is computer code. It's telling how to build you. And except it's a 4-digit computer code, not the zeros and ones. It's way more complicated. Morality. How do you get the standard of morality unless there's a God? Is it just what you think or somebody else thinks? Then that's not morality at all. It's just everybody's opinion. But we don't really believe that. We really think there's some kind of standard out there, because we say to each other, stop it, don't do that, you shouldn't do that, that was wrong, right? It's just kind of built into us. So where's that coming from? It's not coming from this world. It's got to be a standard beyond us. And then finally, the area of consciousness that I hope we can get into a little bit later this evening. Where does consciousness come from? I mean, think about it. If this world is all there is, it's just material stuff, how do you get that material stuff all of a sudden to go, hey, and to become aware and start thinking? So these are at least some of the things that we can say leads to the idea of a God. And if you've got a God, that leads to the idea of miracles, I would think. Davina, right? Okay, good. I'm trying to learn names here. I'll learn them just in time for the class to be over. Oh well. Here's another case for miracles, which sounds weird, right? Really? You're going to talk science? I thought science and miracles were opposite. No, I think you can actually make a case for the oddness and the weirdness of this world that we have today. I mean, Newton came up with the idea a long, long time ago. Everything was, he called it kind of like a clockwork universe where everything kind of gears worked, and God just kind of wound it all up, and then he went away. That's the deist God. And that worked for a long, long time. And then you had in the 20th century, what do you have? Heisenberg has this thing called the uncertainty principle. You've got Einstein with relativity, stuff that seems to, just knock all of the reality on its head. The quantum world seems very, very odd. A lot of people are saying these kinds of things sound like we're dealing with miracles in a way. The Big Bang, we talked about that. And if you think I'm just making this stuff up, this is one of my favorite quotes. These were 3 Stanford physicists. These are not nobodies, right? These are pretty high-powered people. They're not Christians, as far as I know. I think you'll tell from the quote they don't sound Christian. But here's what they were talking about. In Nature, this is a big deal. This is a big magazine for people who are interested in biology and cosmology and things like that. This is an interview. They said, arranging the universe the way we think it's arranged would have required what? A miracle. Not, it's sort of like a miracle, or it's on the edge of a miracle, or it's sure weird. They didn't say that. They said it would require a miracle, an unknown agent. We'd say, hey, we know who that agent is. But they said an unknown agent beyond space and time intervene. There's that idea again, like Metaxas is talking about, coming into this world. Intervene in the evolution of the universe for reasons of its own. I look at that and I think, they're on the right track in my book. Good for them. I don't know if they took the next step, which would be, could you ever know that agent? That's what Christianity says, we know the agent. But hey, that's a big step, isn't it? They called it a miracle. How about this? Again, I'll go quickly over this because we've talked about it before. I think you can make a case for miracles because of the New Testament. It's reliable. We talked about that. So many manuscripts allow you to compare them to see what the original was. Copies are close to the originals. That's good. You don't want something hundreds of years later. It's far closer than any other ancient manuscript is to that original. You got eyewitnesses. I think you can pretty well say it's eyewitnesses that wrote it, which again makes you think it must be close to being accurate. And you got the resurrection. We talked about reasons to buy into a resurrection of Jesus. So you talk about the New Testament as, again, something leading toward the possibility of miracles. How about our experiences as well? You know, they did a study one time and they found something like a quarter of the American public says they've experienced a miracle. A quarter? I mean, let's let that sink in for a second. A quarter of the public says that they've experienced, not heard about it or read it secondhand or whatever. They've experienced it. In fact,
that means 5 of us in here?
Yeah, maybe. If we had more time, I'd tell you a story about an Escondido cop. So if I have time at the end tonight, I'll tell you the story, okay? Because I trust this guy. But anyway, we'll come back to that. Metaxas, Eric Metaxas again, I think I mentioned he wrote a book on miracles. Here's what I like about his book. He took people he personally knew, not just had heard or is in a Christian magazine somewhere where you go, I don't know. So he took people he knew and he fills the book up with miracle stories. Not just, oh, that was an interesting coincidence. I mean, just flat out miracle stories. Craig Keener has a double volume called Miracles, and he takes miracles from all over the world, especially places outside the U.S. His wife, I think, comes from Africa, so he's got a lot of stories of African miracles. And then there's I think I may have mentioned this one a week or two before, but Signs and Wonders in America today. Really powerful. It tells who, it tells where, and it tells when, and it tells stories of miracles, people being healed and all sorts of amazing things. Okay, here come the objections. You can probably guess some of them. Hey, you can't believe in miracles, they violate natural laws. So, but here's where you come in.
All right? That's why they're a miracle.
Well, what's that? Let me start, Trace. What?
Yeah, it's a definition of a miracle.
What? That it violates?
Yeah. So I mean, so it's just to say a miracle can't happen because it violates natural laws as a tautology. You can't have a miracle by definition.
Yeah.
It's trying to rig the game.
What were you saying, Gil?
Well, basically what he said, that's why there are miracles, because they do violate natural law.
I want to even know, it's the word violate that bothers me up here. So what I did was, brought a baseball in, season's about ready to start, and I'm glad Steve's not here because his Dodgers always kill my Giants. I get so irritated with, so he can't harass me tonight. But if I have a baseball and I drop it, what's happening? There's the law of gravity, right? But if I decide to put my hand in there and grab it, did I violate the law of gravity? Did I annul it?
No, you intervened.
I intervened. See, that's what bothers me about, I didn't violate that law of gravity. The law of gravity works whether I grab it or I just let it go, right? So the law of gravity stays the same. I'm not messing with the law of gravity. I'm just deciding, okay, I'm going to intervene with it. I'll do something with it. Right? So I think that might be a different way to take a look at it too. Here's something else thing about the laws that they talk about, oh, natural law. Natural law doesn't predict the future necessarily. It's how things happened in the past. That's how they come up with it. They look at 1,000 things in the past and say there's natural law. But it's not to say that tomorrow something different might happen. Miracles are interruptions. They're not really violations, so I did my little baseball thing. They don't contradict science at all, do they? They're outside science. They're supernatural, right? Science works with the natural world. It works with clouds and sun and stuff that's here, but miracles deal with things outside of science. So science doesn't really have a right to say it is or is not a miracle, because science has its sphere, and then this is outside of that. Here's another objection. So what I'll do, instead of putting it into one sentence, it's hard to do. So I'm taking David Hume. He was a philosopher back in the 1700s. And for a long time, people thought this was just a killer to miracles. Hume was an extreme skeptic, and he went through a 5-step process here. So let me share it with you. So he says, first of all, natural law describes a regular occurrence. I don't see a problem with that. Anybody see a problem with that? It's a natural occurrence. You throw that ball up in the air enough times and it just keeps dropping, so you figure over and over again there's got to be something that's drawing it down. Number 2, a miracle is a rare occurrence. Okay, I don't think anybody's going to disagree with that one. Number 3, evidence for the regular is always greater than for the rare. I want to come back to this one. This is the one that I don't think works, and in fact most philosophers today that look at Hume's argument have abandoned it. They said, nah, that doesn't work. But for a long time, he was king of the hill. Everybody said, yeah, Hume's proved it. There's no such thing as miracles. So let's come back to this. So he says you're going to get more evidence for the regular than you will for the rare. Number 4, always base your belief on the greater evidence. Well, where do you say that's coming from? Back to number 3. It's going to come from, the regular stuff that's going on. So here's his conclusion. Therefore, don't believe in miracles. Circular. Yeah, can we go back to that number 3? I mean, to me, that's the one that bothers me the most. Evidence for the regular is always greater than something for the rare. Can you think of any exceptions to this?
Human body.
Eric?
Oh, go ahead.
Oh, I was going to say the human body changes so much. People have been designated to die, and they suddenly get better. What
Yeah.
is that?
Yeah, we've seen those kinds of things. Evidence is not always greater, because you can think of situations that is good evidence. It's scientific evidence, or it's a doctor or something like that, x-rays, What were you going to say, Eric?
Well, there's this aircraft that crashed in the Atlantic a few years ago, and there's only one little piece of evidence that the pilots screwed up. And not only did the pilots screw up, but every aircraft, FAA, CAA, all the aircraft safety people around the world screwed up. One little piece of evidence. For you to say that before the evidence was found, you'd have been called an idiot. I mean, you're saying all these engineers are wrong, all these other people are stupid, one little tiny piece of evidence. That's not a miracle, that's just fact.
Yeah.
So, the evidence, you may have more evidence for the regular, but that doesn't mean that if I don't have a true statement, a little tiny piece of evidence, that things don't change.
Yeah. Here's some other exceptions. What's more rare than the beginning of the universe? It just happened one time, but we all buy into that. That seems to throw this idea, it's always greater than for the rare. Look how rare that is, and everybody buys into that, so there was no problem there. The origin of life, that was rare, happened one time. History of the world, how about Hume's birth? That was pretty rare, it happened to him once. We all have a rare event, the fact that we were born. So the rare can sometimes outdo the evidence for the regular. Does that make sense? And it excludes what people have actually looked at themselves. It throws that out. It says, no, there's the regular out there. I don't want to hear your evidence. It's like, la, 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 right? Hume didn't want to hear that. But there are cases where you've actually witnessed these things. And there are a lot of improbable events. I bet some of you are golfers, and you've seen somebody make some incredible golf shots. They have holes in one that people can do. That's rare. You're going to say, oh, it didn't happen? Because that's more rare than to not get it in the hole from the tee? It's like, really? No, it does happen. People have seen it. They've had cameras follow the golf ball going into the hole. He just doesn't weigh evidence, which is kind of odd for a guy that's supposed to be this wise philosopher. He says, that doesn't count. I'm just looking at the regular stuff, and whatever you give me as a piece of evidence against the regular you think is a miracle, I don't want to pay any attention to it. It doesn't... It's nothing in my book. Like, really? Why wouldn't you look at the evidence? You know, because there are some miracles I don't think really were miracles. You know, people will talk about, it was a miracle I ran into today. Really? Anyway, so his problem is he doesn't look at any evidence. He doesn't consider that. And that's back to the New Testament again, right? I think we have plenty of evidence for that. Here's a third objection. Hey, don't deal with miracles. They're anti-science. Anybody have a rejoinder to that?
What is anti-science? What does he mean by it?
Okay, they mean that, you know, science deals with everything that's in this world today, and to throw a miracle in there is to say your science doesn't count anymore. Right? You can't count on this happening all the time because a miracle intervenes, so it destroys science. It hurts science. What? And miracles, we're back to this again. Miracles won't contradict science, right? They're outside of science. So science can still do its thing, whether God, you know, or I reach in there and I grab a baseball or something. I didn't ruin science. If people want to study gravity, the gravity's still there. They can still mess with it. But I'm reaching in and doing something with it. So miracles are outside of science. They're not hurting science at all. Here's a last one here. Well, I got two more, I guess. Belief in miracles would stop scientific work. People would start in to explain something and say, I don't know why. You know, why is there thunder? I don't know. It's God doing something. Why is there lightning? I don't know. That's just God throwing bolts down. You know, that's their view, that somehow people will defer to miracles as always an answer rather than thinking through the hard thing as far as doing scientific work. Does that make sense? I mean, do you see any problem with that view?
Science is in the pursuit of the natural, to explain the natural.
Yeah, I think you got to keep coming back. If you're ever dealing with somebody that's bringing this up, the idea that these are two separate ideas that are going on here. It's an orderly world. It's not going to mess up science. We know that God set up these laws. He was a careful creator. We look back in Genesis, and what does he do? He says, that's good, that's good. He didn't just throw it all together, right? He did it in sort of a process. And he gave us minds that are orderly minds, and we can go out and we can figure out this world. So it isn't going to hurt that at all. Miracles are rare anyway. It's not going to overwhelm science. Science is still going to go on. Michael?
One thing about modern science is that when you look at the quantum realm and quantum physics, it gets into some things that science are kind of woo-woo about, because how can an observer affect a physical experiment? I mean, there's something going on there that's weird.
Yeah.
And so even science, as far as quantum science, is weird stuff.
Yeah, I've heard that they mess with a particle over here and it makes a particle over there that they weren't messing with react. I don't know what you call it. What?
It's called quantum entanglement.
Quantum entanglement, okay. Wow. So, I mean, yeah, there's a lot of pretty strange things that are going on that level here. Here's the last one, fifth objection to miracles. I've never seen one. Back to Tracy's question. So, and? Hey, you've probably never seen an electron either. But you trust other people, you know, that tell you what's going on that level. Miracles are not common. Of course you're not going to see them all the time. By the way, you ever notice in the Bible when they talk miracles, people go, oh, the Bible is just full of miracles. You're aware, I guess, right, that the miracles in the Bible they kind of cluster around certain time periods. You know, like the Jews in Egypt or the time of Jesus. I mean, they're not just all the way through. You don't find miracles every page when you're flipping through the Bible. It's certain time periods, the prophets and the time of Jesus, about 3 times, you know. The rest of it's not there. So here's a summary of this one. This is from William Lane Craig. I like him. If there is a creator, here we go again. If you can at least make a basic case for the existence of a God, you're moving along pretty well to coming up with at least people grudgingly accepting miracles. If there's a creator who designed and brought the universe into being, who sustains its existence moment by moment, who's responsible for the very natural laws that govern the physical world, then certainly it's rational. It's rational. It's not just, oh, I feel so good, you know, it just makes me feel all warm and cuddly inside that there might be miracles. It says it's rational to believe the miraculous is possible. So I'll end on that one for the first half of the evening, but anybody have a question or a thought before we pick up the second one about souls? We're okay? All right. This one's harder. But it was about 3 or 4 years ago I got interested in this because I was hearing, you know, people come along talking about nobody has a soul. That's just old-fashioned thinking. So I got really curious about it, and I thought, how do you go about proving the existence of a soul? You know, it's like I went to your house and you said there's an invisible man, but I didn't find one. You know, it's kind of like one of those things where you go, well, how are we going to discuss this thing? Let's start, though, by talking about what's the common view among people who are not believers in the soul. It's something called physicalism. You know, this is just all there is. And so Francis Crick, the discoverer of DNA, you, your joys, your sorrows, your memories, your ambitions, your sense of identity, free will, I want to come back to that, are in fact no more than the behavior of what? Just nerve cells and molecules. So you're just chemicals all the way down. That's all that's making you, you. It's physical stuff. It's neurons firing. It's your brain, right? You don't have a mind. You don't have a soul, whatever you want to call it. You just have a brain. And your brain is doing these things. Leave it to Richard Dawkins. Once more, back to Richard Dawkins. My thoughts, my beliefs, my feelings are all in my brain. My brain is going to rot. I don't know how he can say, I can see him saying that if he feels good physically, but as he ages and as he realizes what's coming, I don't know, do you go into that final stage of your life with that attitude? That's pretty grim, isn't it? Just saying someday it's lights out and that's it. The best I can hope for is they give me a nice casket, so I'll look good, you know, at the end there. So why should we care? Why are we spending time talking about a soul? Well, there's a bunch of good reasons. The Bible's made a claim about it. Did the Bible get it wrong? The Bible talks a lot about souls. Our immortality is at stake here, isn't it? Or Jesus on the cross, today you'll be with me in paradise. He's suggesting to that thief, this is not the end. It's not the end for me. It's not the end for you. It says there are things that are important to know outside of science. You know, science doesn't define everything we ought to know. It says, you know what, there's some theological information that's pretty important that we ought to figure out here. And it opens up a whole world of things outside of this natural world. And God's in that other world. And if we don't have any soul, we're back to that statement, what did he say? No free will? If there's no soul, if we're just meat all the way down, there's no free will. You're doing things because your chemicals tell you to. You're doing things because your neurons are firing in a certain way. And that's, to me, this is a real tough thing for a physicalist to come up with, to defend. The lack of free will. We'll talk about that in a few minutes. So how in the world do you support the idea of a soul? I mean, where would you go with that? Well, you know, you can always start with the Bible. I put, yeah, but. Anybody see a problem with going to people and saying, yeah, there's a soul, because 2 Corinthians, Galatians, right? What's the problem with that?
They don't believe the Bible.
They don't believe the Bible. That doesn't get you anywhere. They're going, oh yeah, of course it says a 2,000-year-old book, ho hum. So what we're going to do tonight is go to areas that, again, you think, really? You're going to talk science and talk about a soul? I thought science and souls were kind of like, distinct areas. They wouldn't interact. We'll look at some authorities. And then we're just going to do some common sense reflections. So these will be the three big areas we want to take a look at. So support from science, really. Where are we back to again? The existence of God. If you can argue for the existence of God, which we've done, this will be, the third time in about 2 weeks. If you can argue for the existence of God, you're doing pretty well, right? There's something outside the physical world. You can't touch it, taste it, smell it, whatever. So that's a realm of a soul. So I won't take time on that. But what about authorities? Let's talk authorities for just a minute. Are you familiar with that term, near-death experiences? Yeah, some Christians really buy into it, and other Christians go, nah, I don't think so. It's just, overdone. People going to heaven for 30 minutes. Okay, I'm pretty skeptical about that kind of stuff. But let me share with you, and I won't take a bunch of time here, but I'm just going to make a list here. There's a book out by J.P. Moreland. I think they've changed the name of it. It was called Immortality. If you look up J.P. Moreland, you can probably find it. It's an older book now. But he's a very careful philosopher, Christian thinker, and he accumulated all these stories of near-death experiences, and he didn't keep ones that were just like, oh, I heard it from my Aunt Thelma, 5 years ago, and I don't know where it came from. He didn't do that kind of stuff. He went to medical authorities, and he went to people that were trustworthy people, and they put some of these stories together. And I'll just share a couple of them with you here. So there's a girl named Katie. She almost drowned in a pool. Her doctors gave her a 10% chance of living, but 3 days later she recovered, relayed an amazing story. She described the physical characteristics of the doctor during the resuscitation, details of the hospital rooms that she was taken into, particulars of the medical procedures used on her, but she was comatose all this time with her eyes shut. But it was like she was seeing all of this stuff while she physically really could not see this. Here's a story about a boy named Rick, a 5-year-old, meningitis, so he was in big trouble. They got him in an ambulance, headed for the hospital, parents and friends trying to pile into cars to go to the hospital. And at that point, he decided he'd stay behind. But his body went on to the hospital, and he watched the family members getting in their cars. He then went out of body to the hospital, and he got there ahead of the ambulance. He watched hospital personnel move a girl about 12 years old out of the room that he was going to occupy. And all of this was verified later. I'll end with this one because this is kind of a funny one. A young lady was in a hospital near death. That's not the funny part. She experienced herself leaving her body. So she goes to the other room where the relatives are sitting around waiting. And it says she witnessed her brother-in-law saying he was going to stick around to see if she kicked the bucket. His words. Later, after her recovery, she confronted him. Can you imagine that? Jaws dropping. I'll do one more. A blind chemist. He'd been blinded a year prior to the accident. He was able to correctly report visual details surrounding his near-death experiences. So again, these are not, third-hand kinds of accounts. I mean, these are people that were authorities in position to know some of this stuff. So again, I wouldn't bet the farm on it, but I mean, it seems like it's pretty legitimate stuff. Anybody have a thought about these, by the way, Michael?
One other thing I've read about studies of near-death experiences is that a lot of people, or maybe most of them, during this time, have a hyper-aware sense of reality. Not just, we know we're in this room, we can see things, but they describe a realm where they're hyper-aware, even more than we are here.
Yeah.
I thought that was pretty interesting.
Yeah. Yeah. Vinny?
Most of these cases, they're always talking about visual, but people are forgetting that your brain, even in a coma, parts of it, it's not turned off completely. You can still hear things. Mm-hmm. And if you have a visual, dream-like center in your brain, what you're hearing, or even if your eyes are just slightly open, you can kind of see things around you. that can be enough to reconstruct in a dreamlike way, well, what's going on around you. So
Yeah, that would be a natural explanation for that. But they had another odd one I thought was interesting. It was a kid that said there were a pair of tennis shoes up on the roof of the hospital, and he described the color and everything. And he wasn't messing around up there. He was really, really ill and down below, and they found the shoes later when they went up and took a look at the roof of the hospital. So, I mean, this is something. I find it fascinating. How about this? The San Diego Naval Medical Center had part of an article that I brought in today. It was years ago, but it's called New Mission, Alternative Medicine. And what they were doing, what they were reporting on, was trying to help wounded sailors and soldiers and things like that, trying to give them alternate treatment, because they said too many times they're just looking at people as a body going, well, this isn't working or that's not working. Give them a pill, give them a pill, give them a shot, give them physical therapy. And they said, that's not doing it. And they said, we need to have some kind of alternate there. And one speaker said this, which I thought was pretty Christian: stop thinking of your body as a thing. So the idea was you have a mind that needs to be helped as much as the physical part of you. Doctors from and this was reported in this article, doctors from the Massachusetts Institute for MindBody Medicine, quote, they found a 40% reduction in doctor visits if you treated people's minds separate from their bodies. That makes sense to me, doesn't it? I mean, we know that if we are in a good mood, sometimes that pulls us out of a physical problem as well. So it seems pretty obvious to me. Here's some more authorities. American Psychological Association, not exactly a Christian group. A panel's conclusion: near-death research. Here we go. So they bought into that. They researched it, and they said it provides evidence for a spiritual realm and/or life after death. Psychology Today, not a Christian publication. Does the soul exist? Evidence says yes. And then I found something not all that long ago. Researchers claim that humans have souls which can live on after death. And they interviewed Sir Roger Penrose. He's a big deal when it comes to physics and all sorts of stuff. He hung around Stephen Hawking and had all sorts of brilliant ideas. He's a Sir, right? So he's noted for research, but he buys into this. Humans have souls. So this is not just Christian wish list, right? There are some authorities. And then here's my best authority. What does Jesus say? Don't be afraid of people who can kill the body but can't kill the soul. He says you ought to be afraid of the one who can destroy both the soul and the body, right? These are two separate things to Jesus in hell. And he knows best because he went, right? He was dead and came back, so I would trust the things that he had to say. So let's spend a little bit more time, we got a little bit of time here, on this third area called just common sense reflections about why we think we have a soul. So I got this picture, it's just rocks. That's one of my favorite pictures. I love the colors of the ocean when it's that shade there, that blue. So we're going to talk free will for just a couple minutes. Do rocks have free will? Do they decide what they want to do? No. Kind of dull life, huh?
Where they want to lay.
Yeah. What about the tide, right? I gave you a picture of the ocean. That the tides don't say, I want to come in now, or I'm going to wait for a while, or this isn't good for me. That doesn't happen. The tide just does its thing because it's just stuff in motion. It's just part of this world. But what about people? Do we think people have free will? We demonstrate free will all the time. Every day we demonstrate free will. We try to change our behavior. That's the whole point of January 1st, isn't it? It lasts until about January 3rd. But gymnasiums, right? The workout places love that. People come in the 2nd going, I ate too much. They sign up and they're gone by February, so you don't have to worry about it. We evaluate arguments all the time. We say, that doesn't sound right. What are we doing? We're using free will to decide that's a good argument, that's a bad argument. We change our minds a lot. I'm going to do this now, I guess I won't do it. That happens frequently. We're making daily choices. You don't feel like you were forced to wear that shirt or that pair of pants, right? You opened up the closet and said, oh, dirty, 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 where's the clean one, right? You grabbed whatever it was. You made the choice. And why in the world would we honor people for courage if we didn't think there was free will? I mean, think about the house burning, somebody runs in and pulls somebody out. We don't say, those are just your neurons firing. Yeah, you don't get a medal for that. It's just your neurons. You decided it would work. We honor people on the battlefield. We honor people rescuing others. We honor people that go work in a soup kitchen. We honor people who help the homeless. We do that all the time. Why? Because we think they had a choice. They didn't have to be out there. By the way, the flip side of that we'll talk in a couple of minutes. What about punishment? If there's no free will, why do we have jails? We'll talk about that in just a second. I want to spend just a couple of minutes here on something called the law of identity, which I know starts sounding too philosophical, but it's a real basic concept. Let's start this way. If you have a brain and you have something else called the soul, and they're actually identical, right? There's no separate thing as a soul. It's just the brain. Then they ought to have identical characteristics if the brain really is the soul. It's kind of like an equal sign, right? The brain equals the soul. There's no separate thing called the soul. It's just your imagination, just a brain. They should have identical characteristics. That's the law of identity. I'll show you how that works here. So here at Emmanuel Faith, if a lot of you go to Emmanuel Faith, I think you do, is Ryan Paulson, right? So we've got Ryan Paulson here. Is he the lead pastor at Emmanuel Faith? Somebody is coming to the church for the first time and they haven't met Ryan, and they said, hey, I want to meet your lead pastor. I've heard things about him. And so you say, well, Ryan came from Colorado, married a woman named Kelly, has 3 kids, former pastor in Colorado, came to EFCC in 2019. Is that who you've heard of? And the guy will probably say, yeah, that's what a friend told me about Ryan. So you go, okay, you're right? Ryan is the lead pastor. This is the same person we're talking about. You can do that any number of ways. You could say Neil Armstrong. Is he the first man on the moon? Is that the same person? Yeah, you run down the list of born in Ohio and married and divorced and had a child that died and height and weight. It's going to be the same for both because they're identical. They're not 2 separate things. They're the same thing. So how are we doing? Does that make sense, or did I scramble it too badly? Okay, I think it'll work well. I want to show you some examples here. So how about accessibility? If the brain is your mind, they should be both equally accessible. The brain is publicly accessible, isn't it? You can, do one of those little saws and crack the skull open, and you can get access to it, and you can touch electrodes or whatever you want to do. You can see a brain. It's public. Everybody can crowd around if they want to, and they can look at that brain. Can you do that with the mind? Is that public accessible? No. In fact, doctors that are working on a brain, they'll touch something. Do they go, oh, okay, I know what you're thinking now? They don't. They say, what are you experiencing? Because they can't access that. They can't access the mind. They can access the brain. They must be 2 separate things. They're not identical. They don't share the same characteristic here. By the way, I'm going to do about 3 or 4 characteristics. There are a bunch more, but I'm just going to do 2 or 3, maybe more tonight. How about brain? Here's this Ryan, if you don't know Ryan, your lead pastor. So brain versus mind, here's a second area to think about. Are they really the same? I just call it impersonal and personal. So you could read about and know everything about Ryan. You could sit down and talk to Ryan. You could talk to his friends. You could talk to his wife. You could talk to his kids. You could go back to Colorado and see what people said there. You could watch his sermons. You could know everything possible about Ryan, but you'll never know what it's like to be Ryan. Even if he tells you this is what it's like to be Ryan, that's not the same thing, is it? You're never going to know what it's like to be like. So the world, the stuff out there in the material world is impersonal. It's just stuff. But we have a mind that is so unique and so different than the material stuff. Same thing, somebody did a article about bats, and they said, same thing, they said you could learn everything you wanted about bats. You could be the world's #1 expert about bats, but you don't know what it's like to be a bat because you've got all this impersonal information. You know how old they get before they die, how they mate, where they live, how they eat, that sonar thing that works. You could learn all of that stuff, but you can't experience a bat because that's personal. So we got this these two things are going on are different, right? The body stuff is not the same as the mind stuff. Here's one more, measurable versus measureless. This is pretty obvious. You can measure a brain. You could, heft it, or you can take pictures of it and all this stuff. You can measure it, height and color and all that kind of stuff. Can you measure your thoughts? You're thinking about eating. Is that 3 inches long? What color is that thought? How much does it weigh? Right? You can't, it doesn't work. So all I'm doing with these illustrations is trying to say, you got the physical stuff, but you've got this mind stuff that it's not the same at all. We'll do this one more and see if this one makes sense. So the brain operates with traditional senses, doesn't it? Your sights get translated in the brain, and the smells and the sights and all this kind of stuff. It needs the outside world to kind of make sense of all of the things it's getting, the input. But the mind doesn't need the senses. So think for just a minute. Can you picture Lincoln right now? Abraham Lincoln? Yeah? But you don't have, you're totally dark up here. You've got no light waves. How are you doing that? Right? That's your mind that's doing that. Somehow you're recreating the image of Lincoln in a totally blacked out skull. Can you listen to your favorite song right now? Can you hear it? There are no sound waves. I don't hear anything. But you can hear that song. I was doing Beethoven. Da 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 da. Right? So you can do that. Can you right now picture, can you feel petting a cat? That fur, that softness? Our granddaughter just got herself a little bunny. They got to be the softest animals in this world, so I was petting that bunny. I can feel it right now. But I'm not touching anything. I can feel it. So all I'm doing again and again is just trying to suggest these differences. It doesn't seem to me the mind is the same thing as the brain. How about one last one here? Change over time. Every 7 to 10 years, including your brain cells, I've heard, you replace all your cells. Are you a different person every 7 to 10 years? No. You, thinking of yourself as a being, your mind, you're the same person. You've got a different body than you had a few years back. There is a difference, isn't there, between the mind and the body, or soul and body, whatever you want to say. Now, somebody's going to argue, they'll throw this out here. Yeah, but, and here comes the yeah, but. We just think we have a mind. That's just an illusion.
It's a mind trick.
How do we think if we don't have a mind?
See, that's a catch with that one. You're exactly right. Who or what's having the illusion? Your mind is. So kind of self-defeating statement there. Here's another common sense way to just recognize the differences. Some things do exist outside of this material world. We've got laws of logic. Where do they come from? We think there are such things as laws of logic, but they don't. You can't pick them up. You can't throw them in a backpack. There's this thing called natural law, mathematical laws. What did the founders of our country say? We're endowed by our Creator with what? Certain inalienable rights. You can't weigh those. They didn't weigh 5 pounds. You can't put them in a pressure cooker. I mean, you can't do anything with these things. They're just out there somewhere, but they're not in the material world at all. Then you got this huge area that I mentioned a little bit earlier about God. And one of the arguments for the existence of God is consciousness. David Chalmers, he's a philosopher, he said this: conscious experience is at once the most familiar thing in the world and the most mysterious. Why does it exist? How could it possibly arise from lumpy gray matter? Right? How does the physical stuff, chairs, whatever we've got in the room here, the air, flags, clock, how does that stuff at one time in the past wake up? Nobody's ever been able to figure that out. And so you get books like this, The Mind-Body Problem. Book after book after book will have this as the title. But guess what? This is not a problem for Christians. This is a problem for people that are not Christians, saying, okay, so there's no God, and it's just everything's physical. How did that physical stuff wake up? No answer. It says, Guide to the Current Debate. Gates of Debate. They don't have answers. And then we talked about this. If you don't reward people because you don't buy into having a choice, free will, then why are we locking people up? They didn't have a choice. Hitler didn't have a choice. Why do we get angry at Hitler? He just had different chemicals going around and around than we do today.
Deadly chemicals.
What's that?
Deadly chemicals.
Deadly chemicals, yeah. But you know, you can make that argument then. If you're the person caught in a murder case or something, you'd say, I don't have free will. And you start quoting some of these people, B.F. Skinner and some of these others, that say you don't have free will. And you say, I should go free. I just need to work on my chemicals. I don't know how that would work, but I don't think it's going to fly. They're going to throw people in jail anyway. By the way, physicalism, this idea that there's nothing about a soul inside of us, that brings a huge loss. You don't want to live in a world that's just physical. Richard Dawkins, I mean, can you imagine this? We just had Valentine's Day. This is how he described love. It's a product of highly complicated nervous equipment or computing equipment of some sort. Yeah, try that on Valentine's Day, dear. I appreciate, you know, my complicated nervous system is reacting to you. It's like, oh, yeah, run. You know, if you ever submit that kind of card to your love. And think about all the things that are important to us. Very few of these things are physical. Right? These are things that touch our heart in one way or another, that are important to us. If you make a list of the things you can't live without, the most important things to you, very rarely on that list are you going to have physical stuff. Maybe health, money, but you know, a lot of it's this stuff. So you look at a sunset, if you're a physicalist, what can you say? You look at it and you go, well, it's kind of red because red is a longer wavelength, and so when the sun goes down, it's going through more of an atmosphere, because at high noon, the blue waves that are shorter and yellow, you know, that comes through, but in the evening, they get absorbed by the atmosphere, and it's only the redder colors that come through. No, I think we go there and we go, that's beautiful. I love that. It makes me feel peaceful inside, makes me feel happy, makes me feel warm. Get a chair on the beach there and look out at that. Look for that green flash. I've never seen the green flash. Anybody ever seen that? Really? A couple of you have? Oh, okay. Or you go to Yosemite. If you're a physicalist, what do you say? Well, a long time ago, there was this glacier that came through this valley, and it tore this huge trough through the area. And these rivers that at one time had just run through on the surface, since it's gouged out, the water now has to fall down. I don't think you say that, do you? You look at that and you go, that's beautiful. Takes your breath away. Yosemite's amazing. I hope you've all had a chance to go there. It's beautiful. It's awe-inspiring. The majesty of that place. Unbelievable. Or this, I like this quote, music. Let's think about music for just a second. Music speaks what cannot be expressed, soothes the mind and gives it rest, heals the heart and makes it whole, flows from heaven to the soul, not to your ears, to your soul. It gets you here. You know that. I mean, we all know that. There are certain songs that put us in a nostalgic mood. Certain songs make us feel warm and happy. Certain songs anger us. I mean, whatever it is, there's something about a song that's not just wavelengths hitting eardrums. Here's one more problem, which kind of cracks me up. We're back to the self-defeating argument kind of stuff. Physicalists, they make arguments and they write books about why we have no free will. And there's no mind there at all. It's just physicalism. But they form an argument in their mind to write this. Then they have to choose, okay, this is what I want to say. How do I put it together? How do I do my argument? Isn't that part of the mind at work there? If it was just physicalism, they just sit at their computer and just wait for the neurons to fire. There it is. But here's the third thing that cracks me up. They get money from their publisher. Why are they taking money? It's like, oh, I don't want any money. That was just my neurons firing, and that's what happened. Here you go. No, they're going to work a contract out, and they're going to get some money out of it. And they want readers. Why do they write these books? They want readers to change their minds. Right? They don't. Otherwise, you just say, oh, you wrote a book. Good for you. But they don't do that. They wrote the books to convince people. Well, why are they convincing people if we don't have free will and we don't have any minds at all? If we're all just chemicals firing, you can't convince chemicals. So conclusion, I like this. This is C.S. Lewis. Leave it to C.S. Lewis. He has so many good things to say. You don't have a soul. That's the way most of us talk, you know, I have a soul. You don't have a soul, you are a soul. You have a body. Yeah, so the real us is a soul or a mind, and it just happens to be hooked up to a body.